I've been paddling since 2007, I think. I had my first go at Big Blue Bay in Devon, which is on the sea, and I was hooked straight away because I caught my first wave, and I'd been wanting to surf all my life, and yeah, it really grabbed me. And for me, I think it wasn't competition at all. It was really a way to get on the water and explore the beautiful sort of estuaries and coastline we've got around here. But obviously with a background in competitive windsurfing and being competitive most of my life, when someone mentioned that there was a competition going on at Watergate Bay, which isn't far away, I kind of thought, okay then, let's give this a go. So my first competition was September Sessions, which was organised by John Hibbard from the founder of Red Paddle Co. And it was a mixture of surfing and racing. Now, I'd done no surfing whatsoever, but the race was actually through the surf break. And it actually attracted, you know, some professionals from other sports like windsurfing who I already knew like Brian Talmer. So it was an amazing experience, and I was absolutely, you know, taken away with it. I was hooked, you know, seeing everyone, what they could do on the water in the surf. And I actually managed to beat a few men as well. So, and then from there, I carried on competing. And at that stage, sort of between 2010 and 2012, it was mostly on the sea for me. So the competitions really were surf and racing, sort of 2-day competitions, elements of both those. So I've always paddled on the sea. Flat water isn't really my thing, and I think it's really captured my, you know, grabbed me. It suits me because I've got a background in competitive windsurfing, and it brings all those elements into it, you know, using the water and the waves and the wind to help me. And then in 2012, I won the national ranked series then, the B Super series, and that qualified me for my first international event. Were you there, Ryan?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
I remember that. Was that when it was Macking Surf?
Massive.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings back some memories. Yeah, so I qualified for my first international event, which was the ISA Worlds in Peru, at the age of 40, and really haven't looked back since. And yeah, I've been really lucky to compete in 6 ISA Worlds, I think, for Team GB, which has taken me all over. I've met some amazing people, yeah, and have carried on sort of staying at the top of the sport, really just because it's my passion. It's I love being out on the water, and I love pushing myself, and SUP really brings all of that together.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I went on a bit there.
Marie. Sorry, Ryan.
I had like 20 seconds.
Well, we didn't hear anything from you, Ryan. There was a bit of a drop. So briefly, Emily, if you could introduce yourself, because the questions are coming in thick and fast. So if you could say a few words now, that would be great. And then we'll be over to you, Ryan, for take 2.
Oh, right.
Hi guys, nice to see you this evening. Hope you're staying safe. My name's Emily King, and I've been competitively paddling for about 7 years now. I do everything pretty much that involves a paddle, board and water. Whitewater SUP, endurance SUP, racing SUP, expedition SUP, yeah, just anything that gets me on the water really and having fun, and I've managed to be pretty competitive and win lots of races, so but mostly had lots of fun and met amazing people like you're seeing on the screen here. So here we go.
Thank you very much. Quickly, Ryan, over to you. I'm sure you've got a long list of titles behind your name, but if you could just give us a little bit of your background and.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, I didn't realise I dropped out. But yeah, literally injured my shoulder. Bought a book, led Force of Nature. I had stand-up paddleboarding. Went on eBay, bought a board, and the rest is history. And I've been doing it for 11 years. Now I'm involved with SUP, outrigger canoe, free diving, spearfishing, prone boarding, open water swimming, anything like that, anything to do with the ocean. Yeah, yeah. I don't love flat water paddling. I hate it, but sometimes you have to do it.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, guys. So just to remind panelists, if you could mute buttons when one of us is asking the questions. So we may as well kick off. The first question that's come in is from Sarah. And Sarah's asking about pre-race nerves. Now, you guys and girls are pretty experienced, having done an awful lot of races, but Sarah's asking, do you still get them? And if you do, how do you turn that into a positive? So over to Emily on this one, I think, and then other guys, you can interject.
Okay, well, the first thing I'd say is that repetition helps to deal with the nerves. So having done a lot of racing on flat water, sprints, ocean, etc., your nerves tend to, you know what you're dealing with, so you're focusing on what's going to happen in front of you. But I do get nervous with white water because it's a bit of an untamable beast. So I still do get those nerves. But like I say, I just try and focus into a tunnel really and look at the first point of what I'm doing while I'm racing, so that I am really focusing on that. And also, really importantly, to breathe as well. So just get lots of concentration going, but oxygenating myself so that I'm not going into shallow breathing. And just try and chat to people a little bit as well, to stop the nerves from building up too much. And
Ryan, what's your top tips if you do get the nerves? I'm not sure if you do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely nervous every single race. It's absolutely normal. Performance anxiety is normal. So if you're not getting nervous, there's something wrong with you. The best thing to do for me is that I focus on the process, not the outcome. So if you focus on where you want to come, you can't focus on actually what you're doing at the moment. So it's about being in the moment, focus on that process, paddle in the water, draw through that stroke, get that board moving, okay, and then work on your race step by step.
And do you we've mentioned this before in a previous webinar, Ryan, I'm just interested to know, do you use any kind of visualization techniques to help settle your nerves?
Yeah, absolutely. I visualize going across the line winning, I visualize the start, I visualize going through halfway through the race. I actually use a performance psychologist as well, that I'm lucky enough to be in touch with, which manages the anxiety side of it. So it's about investing in those other areas. So I always think that whatever is the weakest part of my game or weakest part of racing, I tend to focus on and try and make it a strength. And the mental side is just as important and to be honest, more important than the physical side. Anybody can train, but it's very hard to win.
Absolutely, and very lucky having access to that, Ryan. Marie, sorry. Do you have any top tips for how you might settle your pre-race nerves?
Yeah, I mean, for me, same as Ryan, I get nervous, whatever the race is, whether it's a club race or whether it's a international race, it's all the same. And I think, you need to use that nerves to enhance your performance, really. But I find that pre-race routines help because I do get very nervous. I tend to go, get quite negative thoughts if I don't have those pre-race routines. So I try and focus on those, which is a kind of distraction away from my negative thoughts, and try and turn those into positive thoughts. But what you're saying about imagery, I've started using that quite a lot, and just trying to, especially on the start line or approaching the start line and warming up, I try and imagine myself where I'm going, where I want to be, and then as soon as the race the gun goes, then I don't even think about the nerves will go, and you just channel it into your race, really. And
settle down and focus on if anyone is ahead of you guys or heading for that finish line, however or whatever distance that might be ahead of you. What's your actual favorite distance race, or what would if you had a choice, which kind of distance race would you enter? A short one, a longer one? Emily?
I love them. As long as I know what I'm doing and I've got time to train for them properly and be prepared. I love mixing it up. I love trying all different things. It keeps me sharp. So yeah. Can't hear you, Chris.
Sorry, Ryan. Have you had to choose one? Would it be a race or a long race?
I've done from sort of ultra distance, like 11 cities, and then to to shorter distances like 5Ks. But I love the stuff around an hour, 2 hours. I've been to 11 cities, which is a 220K over 5 days, and I think I finished it maybe twice out of 5 starts. So yeah, I definitely prefer the longer stuff, the shorter stuff now, even though I should be going longer now I'm older. But yeah, I like it because I like to finish it, get down to the bar, have a few beers with my friends, and then chat rubbish about paddling. Yeah, that's the most enjoyable part. It's about linking the racing with the enjoyment and that. So yeah, for me, the shorter stuff.
Sorry, Marie, I'll come to you in a minute, but it's just a funny question come in from Craig while we're talking about alcohol. Craig saying, what's the perfect amount of whiskey to drink the night before of a competitive event?
enough to get your sleep, but not hungover.
Perfect answer. And
feeling anything while going through the pain barrier of racing.
Marie, if you had to choose a distance race, what would you choose?
Mine would be a race from A to B. If it's got like an adventure involved, a bit of unknown, definitely with a bit of tactics involved, a bit of working out the tides, the currents, the wind, getting your brain working rather than being a procession and repetitive. That would be my favourite kind of race. If there's an island involved, that's even better.
So, pretty important topic, this one. A question coming in from Chris Collins. He's asking, what do you eat before a race? And maybe we could also elaborate a little bit on that in your build up to the race a week before, your dietary requirements. Any advice on that one? Over to the panel.
For me, it's just about there's a I don't know about anybody else, but for me that there's a massive industry around sports nutrition, and it's about getting the I guess the weekend warriors and those sort of like part-time athletes involved with it and getting them spending money. Or actually, you just need real food. So my lead up to an event is exactly normal. I don't change anything. And my day of the event, I just eat normal food. So whatever sits and gets digested, anything you like, that's really important. Rather than going on protein shakes or going out and buying electrolyte drinks or carbo loading, just go through the normal day.
And the lead up to that, Ryan, the week before?
Yeah, exactly the same. Breakfast is the same. Evening meals are the same. Just real food. So if you can't cook, learn. Just cook whole foods. Yeah, lots of fruit, veg, meats. If you're not veggie. Yeah, eggs feature quite heavily in my diet as well. So because an egg has everything you need. Basically, produces a living thing. So it's has loads of nutrient density in it, and that's where I go with.
Okay, top tips there. Marie
and Malbec.
Marie, do you have any dietary advice?
Yeah, I think it's similar to Ryan. Really, stick with what you know. I mean, diets are such an individual thing, and I don't know about anyone else, but it's taken me years, and I'm still trying to figure out what's good for me and what's not. But I think if you get too infatuated with it, it's not healthy. I think a big thing is staying hydrated before a race and not letting yourself, get dehydrated. And I think, when I was competing in windsurfing, I used to do a lot of carbohydrate loading, and that just made me feel sluggish, and I slept badly, and sleep is really important as well leading up to a race. So I think it's finding, I think that's the benefits of being an older athlete. You get to know and understand your body a bit more and what works for you. And I think that's all part of the learning process of being an athlete. And I think you just got to, be sensible. Like Ryan says, I try and stick with whole foods so you know what's in there. And, a good balance of protein, carbohydrate, and the other.
Can I ask you guys that
healthy fats
during the race and you're hydrating, What are you actually hydrating with? Are you using electrolytes? Are you just plain water? What's your take on hydrating during the event?
It depends on what environment I'm in. If I'm racing under an hour, then I won't generally need any water or fluid. But if I'm in, you know, say I've raced in places like Nicaragua, which was really high humidity, and water and fluid intake was really important, not just when you were racing, but just, you know, whenever you were, you know, just there trying to acclimatize, and you just needed to stay hydrated, you know, in the lead up to the race and then following the race. Yeah, so in that sort of environment, whether it's less than an hour or more than an hour, I would generally take fluid on board with me, and that would consist of electrolytes, you know, so that it's easily absorbed. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I have just used cordial, a little bit of salt, and then actually I go by taste. So what feels like it's going in, what tastes nice, I think is really important, especially with a long distance race, because, you know, you're going to be sipping on this stuff for like potentially 2 to 3 hours, and you need to want to, you know, it needs to be desirable. So you know, and if you're not taking on fluids, if you let yourself get to the point where you're dehydrated, or you've gone to the point where there's a point of no return as such, you fatigue, and then you lose it mentally and physically. So I think it's nutrition and hydration are both really, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting to say taking on fluids is really important 24 hours before you start to race as well. So rather than waking up on the morning of the race and just bloating out on fluids, if you start drinking and taking on 1 to 2 days before the race, and a bit of a rule of thumb that I use, because like Marie, if it's sort of an hour to 2 hour race, depending on the conditions in this country, it doesn't tend to be that hot. I perhaps would carry an aqua pack, but I wouldn't necessarily take that much to drink from it. But a bit of the rule of thumb for me is, and it sounds terrible, but if I'm going to the toilet and my urine's fairly clear, I know I'm hydrated. So that's always a pretty good one to go by.
Yeah, much the same for me. It's if it's under an hour, hour and a half, then I'm not taking anything. I'm just turning up to the race hydrated. It's making sure you're at least 500 mils in before you even hit the start line, and then you rehydrate after. So even when you're training, it's making sure you're getting your hydration routine in place. All I use is just a simple salt supplement from Precision Hydration. So quick tab, straight into 500 mils of water, gives you your sodium levels, and you can load on that leading up to a race as well. So exactly the same as Emily, I'm looking at my my urine prior to the event and making sure that it's got a little bit of colour in it. If it's not got colour in it, it's very clear like white, then you know you're just shedding fluid, and also that means you're shedding sodium as well. So you want a touch of yellow in it, but it doesn't want to be something that's like it's come from Chernobyl.
No tango.
Okay, some great answers there, guys. Just moving on, slightly different topic. Katen is asking about, can she ask about race starts? She says she suffers from shaky legs as I am on the start line, and I wonder how you would cope with this. Once I'm paddling, I'm fine, but then everyone's washed, so I have to work my way through everyone. But I guess this is the pre-nerves kicking in. But do you guys and girls suffer from that? And any advice?
So the shaky legs is caused by cortisol being released into her system. So one of the ways you can combat that is if she goes and does something that has a quick hit session with her, so you drop that cortisol level, so maybe a quick couple of sprints or press ups on the beach, just bringing your heart rate up and fatiguing you a small amount very quickly, and it's like adrenaline. It will help push the adrenaline through your system. It's not to say you're not going to get a second firing, but you're controlling that release of that cortisol, and you're also pushing it out your system. So it's not quite so prevalent, but timing is really important with that, because obviously you need to do that little bit of warm-up exercise, but then you need enough recovery time as well. And that just play with that, you know, that's something you just need to play with because it's very personal to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at your warm-up, the shorter the event, the longer the warm-up should be. The longer the event, the shorter the warm-up should be as well. And it's all about managing those nerves, because that's what those shaky legs are coming from. Exactly what Emily said. It's that stress response. So you have to learn to work with that stress response and try and channel it into, actually, it's being more Aussie and less British, I would say, because the British are always worried about offending people and being overly nice, and the Aussies don't care. They own it. So they're on the start line, absolutely owning it. So be there, be confident, and that should help.
You've gone silent again, Chris.
Oh, excellent. Great advice again. So while we're talking about legs, we've got a question from Skip. So Skip's saying, on a serious note, he's been playing around with leg power and foot position for his distance paddling to gain advantage. What is your go-to technique for leg power? Any open to the panel?
Is that positioning on the board or exercises for training?
I think Skip's asking about exercise for developing leg power.
Go on, Ryan, bloke to bloke.
Right. So the lower guns. So basically, if you base most of your conditioning training around compound exercises in the lower body, you always work the upper body. So most of the time, my conditioning sessions are based upon squats, lunges, deadlifts, all that sort of stuff, all the stuff that you don't think is working the upper body, but actually does, but also gives you that good base of support when you're on the board as well. And I'm notoriously bad at balancing. I think even when I started, I won't tell you my funniest story ever. That might come later on in the podcast, but I'm notorious for my balance. So something I've had to work really hard on. And that comes a lot from conditioning and actually spending time in the water.
And Marie, you briefly shouted out foiling. So you want to just give us some of your top tips for developing your leg strength? And I'm sure that's going to be foiling.
Well, I think generally SUP uses your legs, a lot more than you think. I guess when you first start SUP, you expect it to be an upper body sport, because of the paddle and the paddling. But actually, if I'm to think about, probably when I go back onto the water now and I'm less conditioned for paddling, it's going to be my legs that hurt the most, for sure. And I think as well as strengthening your legs, also having a strong core can help, take the strain off your legs. I think your legs can overwork and compensate for a lack of core. So I think core work is really important, which can help your balance as well. But also, have a look at some of Ryan's workouts, because I've been doing them and they've been really good for strengthening my legs. Like I said, lunges, kettlebell squats, swings, very similar to supping, especially going in and out over the surf. But yeah, no, I mentioned foiling because last summer, before I broke my foot, I started foiling and learning to foil. And the action of foiling, which is a lot of pumping with your legs, I found really strengthened my legs. And when it came to the distance racing, I hadn't actually done a lot of distance specific paddling. I'd done a lot of foiling, but actually I found my power was there. And so I do feel that I got some benefit out of that kind of foiling as a cross training base.
Okay. I hope
I realise it's not for everyone.
If you want to incorporate some training in day-to-day life, if you haven't got time to get to the gym or do a session, then if you've got sand dunes, running up and down sand dunes is a killer, but it really does do the job. So that would be my top tip.
Marie, you mentioned Ryan's training schedule, so a little bit of a plug here for you, Ryan. But how does our audience locate your training schedule? Have you a website?
Great on Instagram. So just hook me up on Instagram, DM me, or there's videos on there. So yeah, help yourself. It's all free. I don't mind sharing. Again, if you want schedules and stuff, obviously, then that may come at a cost. But literally, fill your boots on Instagram. It's really basic stuff. It's not rocket science. It's literally doing the basics. You do them consistently, and you do them with the right intensity, and then you're guaranteed to get results. So it's just about doing the basics. It's not complicated. You do all the stuff. Exercise and conditioning are all made out to be super complicated, that you need to be doing this and that, but go with the basics. It clearly works.
Yeah, and that's all available on Instagram then, is it, under Ryan James?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Just moving on, guys. So we have got quite a few questions to get through. Chris is asking, which board do you prefer, inflatable or hard for racing? I think I'm going to know the answer to this one, but you could enlighten us.
Okay, well, I really, really like hard shell boards for ocean racing and for sprint racing and for point-to-point racing. But for white water and competing at white water, always inflatable.
And over to the other two.
Yeah, for me, oh my God, inflatables. I would, if the only reason to have an inflatable is if you've got really bad storage options. And then you want to get out on water. So yeah, if you haven't got any storage option, you've got good storage. I mean, get a hard shell board. It goes onto a plane. They're so versatile. I get the thing about lifting onto a roof and stuff, but I mean, my board is just in my back garden, led against the fence, ready for them to pick up. It's not in a racking system or anything like that. But yeah, hard shell is definitely. I'm not sure I could bring myself to go into an inflatable. Although I have paddled them, you just like downwinding, all that sort of stuff it's just so much slower on inflatable. So,
excuse me a minute, Marie, but Ryan, so your board is looked after by the elements propped up against the fence.
Yeah.
A question from Chris is asking, do any of the panelists use any sort of polish or water repellent agent on the board to help or improve or help you glide quicker through the water?
Yeah.
Ryan, yours is natural rainwater. Any take on that?
Well, I got a friend of mine, Chris Rashley, who's got into SUP, but is now into ski paddling. He has worked with America's Cup guys. Actually, he's now the head coach, I think, of Hong Kong sailing America's Cup Team Juniors. But he put me in touch with a guy, America's Cup guy, that basically sanded down the boats. So I took my starboard sprint and got him to sand it back, and then put some polish on it. And I was guaranteed at least 0.2 of a K an hour for free. So that's how much difference it makes. But that could be the winning or losing.
It very well could be. Marie, Emily, ISUP, back to the ISUP, Marie, and the hardboard versus hardboard.
I would definitely go for a hardboard if I could, get it to the event. But actually, my first World Championships was on an inflatable, and it actually proved to be really successful because the stress of getting your board there was just too much, and actually it just meant that I was familiar with my board instead of having to hire a brick basically, which was the only option once we got there. So I think it does have a place, but if I had the choice between the two, it would definitely be a hardboard. I did a race last year in Herm Island in Guernsey on an inflatable, and it was great fun. I think it just depends on what you want to get from the race. But yeah.
I think it's really important as well that what you think about too as well is, like, I've done the Nate race series before, and because everybody's on that same board, it's a really good leveler as well. But also, having done the Nate, it's when everyone's on the inflatable, it becomes even more of a fun bun fight. It really does, because you've got nothing to lose. You're not worrying about your board at all. It's just get in there and just as Ryan puts it, become an Aussie paddler and lose all politeness. So when you've got an inflatable, especially if you're hiring it, it's no holds barred, you're just going to go hard.
I think you made a very relevant point there, though, Emily, regarding whitewater events. So absolutely inflatable, 100% on that one. And Marie, I seem to remember seeing that you were on the inflatable. Was it a Battle of the Paddle event?
Not at a Battle of the Paddle. I've lost you again.
You did it on the Euro Tour at one point, didn't you? When we were down in Kent, you had the Airstream, wasn't it? 14-foot Airstream.
As far as I remember, I've only raced inflatable last summer when I was recovering from my foot fracture, and I went to Guernsey and took it there just because it was convenient. But I think just, you know, racing on an inflatable is good fun. It just, especially if you can enter in an inflatable class, it puts you on a level peg with everyone else. For sure, if you're racing against people on hardboards, you're going to have a little bit of a disadvantage, but I think it's minimal, and I think, you know, in a way, it depends on who your rivals are and how much you want it, and actually it can give you a little bit of an incentive to push a bit harder, really. So it depends on what you know, want to get out of it.
Last season, I was racing 12'6", and a lot of the guys are on 12'6" as well, and the classes were very much mixed with inflatables and hard shells. And as Marie says, I mean, when these guys have got their game on, those inflatables are shifting just as well as some of these hard shell boards are. So yeah, never underestimate them, guys. These guys want to win just as
absolutely.
Power.
I did the 11 cities, not on an inflatable, on a hardboard, but I was with Sam Ross, who did do it on an inflatable, pretty much all the way. And yeah, I mean, he did come out with next to no skin on his hands, but you know, it just proves that they're not that, you know, they are up there. You can still keep up there with an inflatable.
And I guess probably just a quick question is the travel aspect of moving internationally to compete, flying anywhere with a 14-foot raceboard is going to be pretty expensive, I would imagine. So if you have contacts on the other end or the other side where you can hopefully rent or use a good board, you're very lucky. So
it used to be easier.
It's just hard to get on a plane full stop now. Let alone with a board.
Moving on, a question from Sasha. Sasha's asking, how do you find your space on the start line? She says she's always polite and gives space, and also she doesn't want to fall in right at the start. Any top tips for that start line approach?
Yeah, be Aussie. Basically, just get into the front. I mean, I think the most important thing is that you're really nervous and get into the front, get there early, and then stake your claim. If you're not, like me, I'm always late to everything. So I just make my own space, and then people tend to move aside. But it's around what you actually want to achieve in the race, because starting at the front doesn't necessarily guarantee you a good start. Sometimes if you keep yourself out of trouble and stay in the second layer back or to the side, it's really important to realise that, and also to map out the course beforehand. So when you're at the dart or when you're at base SUP, learn about what actually you're going into. So what are the tides doing? Where's the shallow spots? Because obviously shallow equals slow, deep equals fast most of the time. So go out and have a look at where all the spots are, because most people just line up and don't consider where to place themselves on the start line.
Yeah, and are you angling the board on the start line as well to take into account your stronger side? Paddling?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always stronger on my left on the start, so I'll angle it right, so it will pull back, so I can get more strokes in on the left side all the time.
And also think about which direction the wind's blowing from as well. So if your board's going to start to yaw.
Absolutely.
Do any of you guys listen to music while you're racing, or are you totally focused? Or when you're training, as questions come through, do you find music helps you at all in a racing situation? Possibly in training, I get it.
For me, no. Anything that takes away from my balance is not a good thing. So yeah, I have to be absolutely mindful and in that moment. Otherwise, I am in the water. I drift off so easily. It can be anything. If I see a duck on the water, I look at that and that's it. I'm in. So focus for me is really important.
Next time I'm on the start line next to you, Ryan, I'm just going to sing to you.
So we've mentioned the start line. A question from Zach has come in. Zach's saying, when it comes to the latter stages of a race and you're in a real close fight to the finish, it often comes down to who wants it most. So how do you manage to dig deep and keep your desire to win? Do you have a thought process that you rely on in that last final stretch?
Yeah, for me, you get lots of negative and positive stuff going through, especially when it gets to the end, because you're wondering when to go, how long to leave it. So at the end of the day, it's about actually carry on doing what you're doing, putting the paddle in the water and actually look at what the opportunities present. Every board puts off a bow wave. So, I mean, I got done quite royally with by one of my friends, Pete Holiday. I scuffed a stroke. He rode my bow wave over the finish line and beat me by about half a board length. He never lets me forget it either. So it's about actually thinking at that moment. So not to get taken away with emotion. It's about actually planning what you're going to do and then stick with the plan. If you're doing the same thing as someone else, it's one of the things that Steve West always taught me, is actually if you're doing the same thing, you're going to go the same place and you're going to stay the same position. So do something different. There is a risk with that, but a lot of times it works out.
Yeah, top tip there, Ryan. The questions are firing in, so rather than all three answer the same question, I'll mix it up a little bit. Philip's asking, what's your favourite board length to race and why? If we can point that one at Marie, just quickly, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think everything's moved over to 14 foot. It used to be 12'6", but I changed over to 14 foot probably 3 or 4 years ago. And I haven't really looked back since. I don't find there's any disadvantage of using that slightly longer board. I think it's only positives. It gives you better speed. You've still got the maneuverability in the waves. You perhaps have to be a little bit more committed especially for a lighter rider, when you're maneuvering, when you're stepping back to the board, on the back of the board and turning, you've got further to turn. But actually, nowadays, most of the manufacturers make boards with different volumes to suit different size riders. And I think, you just need to pick the one that suits you and your size and your style of paddling, really. I think it's a good thing that people are sticking on the same length board. I think it, pushes everyone. It doesn't dilute the sort of quality in the sport. So yeah, 14 foot is my preference, whatever conditions I'm in, really.
Can I just ask, also, because Craig's asking, how important is the fin selection when racing? Good question.
I personally find it's quite important. Being a light rider, I only weigh just about 8 stone. So if I've got some quite strong side wind or conditions to deal with, having the right fin will really help stabilise the board for me. So yeah, I would always pick a fin to work with what works for me on that particular board. So it can be a bit of a trial and an error, but generally a lot of the fin makers will tell you what their fins are designed for. But because of my weight, I mean, I don't know, Ryan, being a heavier rider, does it make much of a difference for you?
Yeah, I mean, it does. And like Emily says, have a selection, and also you've got to go out and try it. A lot of times board and fin selection can make a lot of difference, because what you're doing is basically sticking something in the water that's causing drag. So ideally, you want to have the smallest fin possible that you can paddle with to cause less drag. But again, you don't want the to loosen the board so much that you find it hard to control. You've also got a little bit, I don't know if anybody else online has it, but you tend to do this on your board. So you tend to almost like a cycling motion. So the bigger the fin, you've got lateral drag that affects the board and slows you down. So it's about staying still, keeping it flat, and also trying to paddle with a smaller fin if you can. But also if you're downwinding, you want a small fin because you want to be surfing the waves, not going straight down the line and hitting the wave in front. You want to be going zigzagging all the way down. Another great Steve West tip: don't go in a straight line. The fastest route from A to B is not in a straight line, James.
For whitewater, we don't really use very big fins at all. We use tiny fins, and actually we do a lot of paddling without fins at all, just to get used to that.
Yeah, while we're talking about equipment, Mark's asking regarding paddle shapes to the panel. Do you prefer teardrop or high aspect, and why? What type of paddle are you using as your go-to paddle now in racing?
Oh, good question. For me, I've been with a paddle manufacturer, ZRE, for, as long as I have been in SUP for. I might actually know. I started with Naish, but it was a welded handle to an out shaft, which I think weighed more than the board, to be fair. But it's around your feel. You don't want to have a dead paddle. It wants to feel alive when you paddle it. You want flex in the shaft, especially the older you get, because of injury, and Marie will be able to pick up on this, is around if the shaft's too stiff in paddling, then you're more likely prone to injury as well. So it's around making sure that you are not making mistakes with the paddling because your paddle technique is bad. A lot of times with the high aspect, you can make more mistakes and you'll still get a good catch. With the teardrops, you have to be quite precise with it, but they tend to be quite efficient. I mean, for me, my blade size has gone really small and my shaft's length has really come down over the years of paddling. So it's, again, really about the way that you feel, but it needs to feel alive when you paddle it.
And Marie, what paddle are you using in your racing?
Yeah, so I tend to stick to the high aspect with a reasonably flexible shaft, purely because, just like Ryan says, the flexible shaft just is a little bit more forgiving, especially for longer distances. I might use a slightly bigger blade if I'm doing a technical race where I want to put more power down and get out through the break, and I know I'm not going to have to do that repetitive paddle action for more than sort of 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Yeah, generally I'll go to the high aspect paddle, but I keep the shaft the same length, and like Ryan, I've tended to drop that down over the years, really just to preserve my body, and also so that I can get a bit more power down through the paddle, on top and over the paddle, rather than if you have it too tall, then you're risking shoulder sort of overuse injuries, rotator cuff problems.
Okay. Top tips again there, guys and girls. Just moving on, a question for Emily. This is from Chris Collins. He is asking, did you think the last race at the Midland SUP at Bartley was mental in that wind? And do you have any, what's your best advice for crazy conditions like that when paddling, when racing?
Yeah, that was an interesting one at Bartley. We were against Dennis, literally, on a reservoir, not even able to carry our boards to the water. Top tips for that are stay as low as you possibly can, keep your cadence extremely high, and don't miss a paddle stroke, because the moment you miss a paddle stroke, you're going backwards. And just try and find the cleanest water and the vortexes that you can. So if you're in a situation where that wind is just blowing in those massive gusts, but also continually against you, just, you know, try and find the wind tunnel. So we were tucking in a little bit into the banks, just trying to get as low as we possibly could. We try and stay out of the shallower water. And when we were on crosswinds, again, just really trying to keep my body in the position where I was facing where I wanted to go to. So again, if my shoulders come off of alignment, or my hips or my body weight starts to shift on the board was going to move. And just relentlessly paddling on the side that I needed to keep the board straight, even though my muscles were screaming at me to swap over. Just like I said, don't miss a paddle stroke.
So this is where the training kicks in a little bit, I'm sure. Can I ask, Ryan, Bruce is asking, what are your thoughts on heart rate training?
It has a really high place in there. I mean, ideally, you want to be training with wattage or power output, which is super hard because there's not a lot of paddles around with a measure inside the paddle that can give you that. So heart rate training or zone training is really important because it gives you the gears. So you shouldn't have one gear; you should have at least 5 gears to go through, like your warm up, your mid-race gear, sprint gear, all that sort of stuff. So that's what heart rate training is really good for. All my sessions, I've got a heart rate. I measure my heart rate through Garmin to make sure actually I'm not overtraining and I'm not undertraining. The training at the right intensity is really important. I mean, it's good to go out and do a recovery paddle, but most of the time it should be based around intervals or at a certain heart rate. So most of the progressions you're going to see is probably, if you look it up, is probably around zone 2, zone 3 through the winter, and then mixing it up through race pace around zone 4, which is about 85% of your max heart rate, which is like 220 minus your age, is like a really poor sum to do, but it gives you a weight or base to work off of. But definitely heart rate training is really worth doing. It's less applicable in sort of downwind conditions, but when you're flat water training, or if I'm flat water training down the river, I was a triathlete before, so we used to do track sessions. So my flat water session is like my track session running, and therefore you can control a lot more of the variables, and therefore your feedback from your intensity is a lot easier. Hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. That's great advice, and it's numerous websites full of this information out there. And again, Ryan, is that part on your Instagram profile? Anything on the heart rate stuff?
No, but there will be tomorrow.
Fantastic. Moving on. Question to the panel: how would you make racing more appealing for spectators? Any ideas? I mean, I was fortunate enough to attend a Battle of Paddle in California one year, and that to me was an amazing spectacle, and it was great. In and out of the surf, buoy turns in the surf zone, racing out the back, catching waves, and personally, that format of racing was, for me, was really, really interesting to watch. So
I think totally right.
Totally
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, me and Marie have both been. Emily, I'm not sure if you've been to BOP, but we were there at BOP in Pacific Paddle Games as well. And it is just an epic event, an epic format. So if they do end up rerunning it, it's definitely one of the races to do. If you want to be amongst probably 3,000 other paddlers, then get down there to California at Dana Point. It's an amazing event. And yeah, just like triathlon, they had to make it loops and laps so you could see everything that was going on. It's really hard to engage with a race unless you've got someone like crazy, like Chris Parker from SUP Racer, following it on a boat and giving you telling you where everybody is. It's really hard to follow. So yeah, the BOP stuff is really cool, although it's my weakest discipline ever.
And on the UK racing scene, are we likely to see any BOP style races being introduced?
Hopefully come the autumn. I think GB SUP are organising a few tech races, some in Northern England and some quite big swells. So if the swell's there, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's a fantastic spectacle to see that.
Just adding to that about the watching SUP racing, just to say, I mean, Battle of the Paddle is brilliant, there's no doubt about it, but for a lot of people it's completely unattainable to ever become that sort of paddler. And so one of the formats that I did last year was sprint racing up at the Nottingham rowing centre, and that was phenomenal, having grandstands packed with other paddlers and rowers and doing heats on the blocks coming off, flying down 200 metres, massive scoreboard behind, the screaming, the shouting. If you've ever been to a rowing event, it was so exciting to be part of. And it's also one of those things that everybody can train to do, you know, as long as you're meeting the times and getting through to the point that you're able to be balloted in to race at something like that. So perfect for clubs, perfect for people that want to maybe just concentrate on flat water paddling as well.
Sarah's asking, favourite race anywhere in the world? Choose one.
Oh, hard. I mean, for me, it's a race I haven't done yet, but it's got to be either Maui to Molokai or Molokai to Oahu. Probably Maui to Molokai because it's like downwind and it's right up your backside, the wind. So it's be a sleigh ride, either on a SUP or a canoe. So yeah, for me, that's definitely the one that that's on my bucket list.
Emily?
Oh, I couldn't choose. There are so many great races out there, and like Ryan said, loads that I'd love to do, probably won't ever get the chance to do, but yeah, no, too many to choose from.
I know, Marie, you've done or you've competed in quite a few events in Perth in Australia. How to?
Yeah. So my favourite races, if I was to pick one in the UK, it's probably not so much a race. It was more of a personal challenge, but it was actually racing from the mainland UK, Land's End, to the Scilly Isles, and that is pretty similar. I mean, we lucked out the year that I did it. I've done it twice now in both directions, but the year I did it, it was actually a perfect downwinder. Easterly.
Yeah, and I was paddling upwind as well. The other way.
And then we ended up finishing in the Scilly Isles, so you know that was for me amazing. But the other race, which is I guess similar to that, is the Doctor race in Australia, where you race from Rottnest Island back to the mainland, and that again is another, it's not as far as 27k, but I did it last November, and we had, you know, great conditions for it. It was you know, on the edge of the racing being cancelled because it was too windy, which was perfect. And yeah, just the whole adventure really of you know, having to think about the tactics, the wind direction, and the currents, and you know, it's not just a procession, you have to pick your course, and it's, you know, 3 hours of hard paddling, so you really feel like you deserve that beer at the end.
And won. Excellent. Can I ask the panel, where do you find your inspiration from? Who is there any particular paddlers that you really look up to? What inspires you? Who inspires you? Silence.
I think for me, I look up to Fiona Weil, probably because she's got a sort of similar background to me, apart from she's half my age. She's got a windsurfing background, and she's just, you know, phenomenal athlete. And more recently, she's been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but she's not let that define her in any way. She's carried on, you know, staying at the top of her sport, and actually, you know, teaches people how to overcome that. So, you know, for me, she's a great inspiration.
Yeah, for me, it's really all the guys I meet. So I've got a big training group down here on the south coast in Bournemouth. So those guys always motivate me. We try and get out every weekend outside of lockdown. Also, just listening to guys like people that first got me into sports. So Westy. So when I spent some time with him, getting to know how to paddle. So, and all the people that he's introduced me to. So people like Travis Grant, Danny Ching, all the guys that have crossed over between sports as well. They're still hungry for it, and also it's all about the enjoyment. So they're less about how serious the racing is a lot of the time, and it's about the family that you do hook up with afterwards and have those beers and share those memories with, and that's the most important part about the inspiration for me.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan there. I'm always really inspired by every single paddler who hits the water, and actually quite often more so by people who are racing perhaps for the first time, because I think, you know, I'm really well trained and really well honed at that whole process. And as hard as the races are for me, you know, going through that mental process of doing your first race and the training and maybe, you know, building your fitness for it, what they paddle is 100 times harder than what I do, or more. And I'm just always really inspired that they come off the water smiling, having such a great time. And I'm just like, wow, this is so cool. I just get to experience that with so many people. So yeah.
Well, there's great answers there, guys. And you've mentioned first-time paddlers, and a question has come in a little while ago. And I am, again, apologising if I have missed some questions. There's an awful lot for me to try and coordinate here. But and we're coming to the end of our hour, and I'm sure your pizza is nearly ready, Ryan. But
you can smell it. It's in the oven.
It's when we hear the siren, that's when we got to worry. Any top tips for the beginners, you know, and encouraging people into this race environment?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a shameless plug, but go out and buy this book. All right, it will tell you everything you need to know about paddling. Then go and get yourself a lesson. There's so many paddlers out there that are beginning, that buy their boards, buy their paddles, and don't have a lesson first. Find out if you like it and you enjoy it. You'll enjoy it, the ocean environment, the river, the water environment, so much more if you're taught properly. So go get there to your local store, like the SUP store down here at Christchurch. You can just get lessons everywhere, and also competent lessons. Like any one of us will recommend in our area good lessons. If it's not with us, it'll be with other people that we know that you know you're going to get a good lesson from. So big up for all the people that are training and keeping themselves up to date with paddling, because it's a technical sport that we're in, and the better you do it, the more enjoyment you're going to get from the water.
Unlike everything I did on my first race, Ryan, I actually got asked if I'd like to come off the water halfway through the race because everyone else had finished. To which I politely said, no thank you, I'm quite enjoying myself, and came last. No, honestly, you've got nothing to lose, guys. Just get on the water. Yeah. There'll be so much encouragement from everybody around you, and the only person you've got to be is yourself. And just go out there. You're going to get it wrong, you're going to get it right, you're going to laugh, you're going to get wet, but just enjoy it and love it. And if you love it, you will keep coming back for more.
Yeah. And GB SUP, they're main organisers of the race scene, I believe, in the UK racing. It's not my bag, but I'd like to take a big shout out to them, and you can check them out on Facebook. I'm not quite sure when the next race is scheduled for. You know, it's a big area of uncertainty at the minute. But I'm assuming the start of the season has been missed, as we know. Can any of you guys just enlighten us as to where we're actually at with potentially the next race on the calendar?
So difficult, isn't it? Or you just don't know when this is going to end. So, I mean, for me, if something comes up in this year, I'll be super excited. But I'm pretty much writing this season off, really, focusing on just trying to spend some time in lockdown positively. So we come back and the whole scene has loads of hunger, and it almost renews itself. It's almost like it's a new chapter. So we've had such a long period where people aren't paddling. To come back into the sport and see everyone again will be great. So yeah, whenever that is, it'll be great, a great time.
And you guys are obviously training in this lockdown. What kind of training are you actually doing? I'm very conscious of time now, so I'm going to wrap the webinar up soon. But if we could maybe just give a few top tips on some training regimes that you're doing while we're in this lockdown period?
Well, I've been finding that I've actually gone back to doing, you know, I found it beneficial to do stuff at home because it's allowing me to home in on my weaknesses, and perhaps beforehand I would just get out on the water and I wouldn't really work on those things. Last year I had an injury, so I was off the water for a few months, and I think I just came back full into the season and didn't really give my body a full sort of MOT, as it were, and I think that inevitably ended up me picking up more injuries, you know, without really building up that level of fitness again. So I think this time has been really valuable for me, and I've just been working on my weaknesses, doing different things like I find Pilates really useful. It doesn't really fill my boat fill my cup as much as you know, obviously going out on the water, but actually it's making me realize that, you know, it's allowing me to identify things that I actually, you know, was skimming over before, and build that base really, and then you know, it'd be interesting to see when we do get back on the water how much benefit that has been. So yeah,
for me it's the same. It's like try and do like Marie's doing Pilates, and I do yoga 2 or 3 times a week. If I'm not in the water, I'm going to have to get onto Concept 2 rower to try and do something that's going to maybe have some sort of transfer across, and a couple of conditioning sessions a week as well. But again, it's about not, Glenn Eldridge the other day mentioned something about actually we're not training for anything, we're just training. So we're just wearing out our bodies. So it's been really conscious that you're recovering properly, and you're not just wearing yourself out just because we're in the position we're in with the current environment as well.
Yeah, just to reiterate on that as well, you know, there's a lot of people out there with injuries, and you can really use this as a rehab time to rest and heal, both physically and mentally for some people as well. Just stay functional, just do lots of different things, do what makes you happy, do what works for you, get out when you can in the fresh air, and smile a lot.
Yeah, top tips there, guys. Well, I'd just like to say thank you ever so much once again for taking part in this session. I hope everyone who's tuned in has really benefited from your advice there. Stay safe. Ryan, you mentioned go and get some coaching. All of these guys here within the WSA can offer coaching, and we're hoping to run our symposium in October up in your neck of the woods, Hayling Island area, and so we'd love to see. We'd love to see everybody up there if you can make it. It's going to be a great weekend. So thanks ever so much. Stay safe, everyone. Look out for the next CPD session, which is next Wednesday through our webinar, which I think is quite an important topic, the use of VHFs and how important they are. And then we'll have another Friday one next Friday. We've got Westy coming back as well. So look out for that. So thanks very much, everyone. Signing off now. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Enjoy your pizza, Ryan.
I will do. Take care. Love you guys. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.